Hey guys, this will be the start of the Chapter 2 lecture videos over ancient Mesopotamia and Persia. So these are the learning objectives. You can take a look at those in the book. Mostly, talking about the relationship between religion and art in Mesopotamia, talking about the writing system that they came up with, talking about Sumerian innovations, pictorial innovations such as narratives and registers, talking about the innovations of Akkadian artists who created ruler portraits with divine attributes. And they also came up with hollow life-size bronze sculptures. And then comparing and contrasting Assyrian and Persian palace architecture and relief carving. And then also just identifying instances of intercultural exchange between ancient Mesopotamia and Persia and other parts of the ancient world. And then also just describing the form and function of the ziggurat, which is basically the Mesopotamian version of a pyramid. So here's ancient Mesopotamia and Persia. So in ancient Sumer, which is actually in ancient Mesopotamia, you can see it's right here. Humans first learned how to cultivate the land and began keeping domesticated animals as well. And the Sumerians invented writing, city-states, urban environments. They were some of the first to include narration in their art, which is a huge advancement from the Stone Age. So let's take a look at our first example here, the Warka Vase. From the Inanna temple complex at Uruk, which is in modern-day Iraq. It's from 3300 BCE. It's made out of alabaster. And it's a great work of narrative relief sculpture. So it kind of depicts a religious ceremony honoring the goddess Inanna. And it actually does contain, this vase contains most of the pictorial conventions that will be used for the next 2,800 years. So one of the main conventions that it's using is that the composition of the vase is divided up into registers. So these bands that kind of divide up the vase and help to tell the story. So the lowest band shows crops, the next band up shows sheep, and this kind of symbolizes fertility. And then above that, we see some naked men with vessels in their hands that they're bringing to the goddess as votive offerings or gifts to the goddess. And the uppermost register actually pictures Inanna. She's right here. And then here's someone bringing her this gift. And actually, they think that this is the king. And the reason we know that is his figure and her figure are really quite large in comparison to the other figures on the vase, which just illustrates their importance. It's called hierarchy of scale when they do that, when it's a common ancient convention. Hierarchy of scale is. So they think that this is the priest king, like I said. And definitely in ancient Sumer, the leader was very important because he communicated with the gods. And so that's what the gods, were thought of as only communicating with the king. So that's why the leader or the king was kind of godlike and considered really important in ancient Mesopotamia. So during this time, in history, humans left behind the uncertain life of being a hunter-gatherer and began the more stable life through agriculture and animal husbandry. And this is called the Neolithic Revolution, when they leave behind their hunter-gatherer ways and became more agricultural based. And this occurred in Mesopotamia, in the area between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. It's got a really fertile delta of land here, lots of water, lots of rain. area is also called the Fertile Crescent, and it's supposedly where the Garden of Eden came from, and Christianity, Judaism, and Islam come from this area of the world. So the first, culture under the Mesopotamian umbrella basically is the Sumerians. And we're going to start off by talking about ancient Sumer, which is in southern Iraq today. And it was comprised of a dozen or so independent city-states under the protection of different Mesopotamian deities. And the Sumerian rulers were seen as representative of the gods, and they were the keepers of the gods' earthly treasures. So they were able to kind of develop a specialization of labor because not everybody had to grow food. Only a small portion of the population actually had to grow food, where the rest of everybody else could become a blacksmith or, a priest. So the specialization of labor is a pretty major advancement during this time. And the city-state was definitely part of that piece of the puzzle. And then Sumerians also invented writing. And they usually kept records of like cattle, food, and other items. And it started off as pictographs in clay. Basically, they used a reed to write in the clay, and they used pictographs. But eventually it kind of was simplified into web-shaped signs called cuneiform. So cuneiform is the first type of writing that the Sumerians came up with. And the great literature known as the Epic of Gilgamesh was written in cuneiform. And it actually predated the Greek poet Homer's Iliad and Odyssey by 1,500 years. So this is a Sumerian temple. It's called the White Temple. It's at Uruk in Iraq. It's from 3300 BCE. And the temples were always located in the center of the city. And this is a 5,000-year-old example. Uruk had the population of about 40,000 inhabitants. And this was made of mud brick, and you can see that it's deteriorated. The mud, from the rains and everything has really eroded this piece of monumental structure here. But this is what it looks like restored. And it originally had white gypsum coated walls, which is how it got its name. So it was actually that mud brick was faced with a nicer stone, basically, that made it white. And it's also oriented to the cardinal directions, which is an important aspect of this building. It was probably dedicated to Anu, the sky god. And they don't think that it had a roof on it, which makes sense. I mean, if it's the sky god, maybe they want that open. And there's kind of several chambers in a central hall or cella that contain an altar. And Sumerians often refer to their temples as waiting rooms, where they kind of waited for the gods to come down from the heavens and appear before the priests in the cella. So that's what they believed happened. And then it's, the temple's kind of built up on this elevated platform. It's almost like they're trying to bring the temple up closer to the gods in the heavens. And the concept that deities reside above in the heavens is definitely kind of a widespread religious concept, throughout a lot of different cultures. So we're going to kind of skip ahead here. Statuettes of two worshippers from the square temple at Eshnunna, modern-day Tel Asmar, Iraq, from 2900 to 2750 BCE, made of several materials, gypsum, shell, and black limestone. So these sculptures were found buried beneath the floor at the Sumerian temple at Eshnunna. Hard time saying that. The sculptures were meant to resemble the donors of the gods' gifts, so they're known as votive statuettes, and they're carved of gypsum. They're not direct portraits, but they do hold some small beakers that would make a libation or a ritual pouring of fluid or liquid for the gods, like wine or some sort of drink. And some have specific prayers written on them for, on behalf of their donor. And they look towards the heavens. Their heads are tilted up. Their eyes are large. They're looking out. They're waiting for the gods to appear in the cella of the temple. And they kind of these large eyes symbolize the eternal wakefulness that they have to have, because they're in constant prayer to the gods on behalf of their owner that had them made. So oftentimes, you know, I would commission an artist to make me a statue, say that, you know, I live back in an ancient summer and I'm rich, and I have somebody make me one of these sculptures. I have them put a prayer on it for me. I have them put my name on it, and then I place it in the temple to do like do the praying for me to some degree anyway. So there's some pieces found at the Royal Cemetery at Ur. So a lot of leading families, when they passed away in this certain area, they were buried at the Royal Cemetery at Ur, and it's got tons of wealth: gold helmets, jewelry, musical instruments, chariots. There's some soldiers found, you know, that probably drank poison because they wanted to join their, you know, king or queen in the afterlife. So they found a lot of interesting things in the cemetery. And this is the bull-headed harp with inlaid soundbox from the tomb of Puabi. So it's a pretty interesting piece. It's reconstructed here, and as you can see, the bull's head is fashioned from gold leaf, and then lapis lazuli is the beard and the top of the head. And then the wooden box is actually inlaid with lapis lazuli as well, and different stones, and red limestone. Here's another sound box of a bull-headed harp from the burial pit of Mescaluamugdung. I don't know, I can't say that. Royal Cemetery at Ur, 2550 BCE. Wood, lapis lazuli, and shell. So they think that this is a inlaid sound box. It's divided into 4 panels, as you can see, by registers, these bands that divide it up, which is a common ancient Mesopotamian convention. Okay, we still have some time. I just needed to check and make sure. So the uppermost is a heroic figure embracing 2 man bulls in a heraldic composition, which a heraldic composition is symmetrical on either side of a central figure. So we have a central figure with symmetrical things on either side. So that's a heraldic composition. Below is a jackal wearing a dagger and carrying a plate or some food on top of this table. And a lion holding a vase and cup. And the next register down features a wild ass playing harp, steadied by a bear, and then below that is a scorpion man and a goat holding goblets. So we have kind of that composite creature again, half man, half creature, which in this case it's a scorpion. So that's a common convention also in ancient art. Everything's in profile view too, as you can see. Well, not everything. I guess these guys are looking forward at us, but there's a lot of profile view going on in here. And even some composite views as well, with a half frontal, half profile face here. So, okay, moving on. Okay, so here's the war side of the Standard of Ur from tomb 779. We're still at the Royal Cemetery at Ur, so they found a lot of really interesting things at Ur. So this is called the Standard of Ur, and it was found in a royal grave, and it's prized by a lot of art historians because it tells so much about the role of Sumerian rulers. It's a wooden box inlaid with shell, lapis lazuli, and red limestone. And it was at first thought to be a military standard, hence the name, but now they think it's probably part of a musical instrument. So there's a war side and a peace side to this. The war side shows charioteers trampling their enemies, you know, soldiers leading some captives up to meet the king here. You can tell that he's the king because he's the largest figure. That's hierarchy of scale. It shows the importance of someone by making them larger than everyone else. And so they're bringing these bound naked captives to the king-like feature at the very top of the composition here in the middle. And so we can tell that he's the king because he's the largest, and they're using hierarchy of scale there. And I'll talk about the peace side in the next video.